What's up guys, this is Andrew at Night and today it is Wacky Jumper Wednesday, so I'm wearing a delightful out of season number. But today I'm going to be running you through 10 Android myths, and these are things that for whatever reason have been perpetuated on the internet and sort of just in general sort of social life about Android. So number one is that Android task killers improve battery life and performance. Now I'm actually part and parcel of the problem here. I remember back in the day I did a couple of videos on, I think it was called Advanced Task Killer, saying that it improved your battery life, improved your performance, things like that. That just isn't true, unfortunately. The way that Android handles memory processing in the background, all you do when you kill an app is mean that some process is probably going to start again, and that actually is detrimental to your battery life and your performance. I think part of the problem is people are convinced that you need to have as much RAM free as possible. That's not actually true on Android. On Android you want to be using nearly all the RAM, and that's a good place to be. Android will just kill all the processes that you don't need automatically for you. You don't need to do it with a task killer. Apps like Greenify are a little bit different because they actually hibernate stuff, so they do actually help battery life, but they're not actually a task killer. Myth number two is that there's sort of one unified Android experience. Now this usually comes from people telling me they've used a Samsung phone or an LG phone or even a Nexus and said they haven't enjoyed the experience, and then because of that they've completely discounted every single Android phone. There's obviously a bunch of different versions of Android. If you have it on a Samsung phone or an HTC, or if you have a pure Android on a Nexus, those experiences are so different that you can't just really use one and then judge the rest of them. Myth number three is that Android is as virus riddled as a cheap Parisian whore. This is not true. It does have viruses, but so does all other mobile OSs. I think one reason this rumour's around is partly because Apple keeps mentioning it at press conferences, and partly because people get confused between adware and viruses. There's a lot of adware on the Play Store, which is when you install an application and then it gives you push notifications, it makes you install more applications, things like that. That's adware, that's not a virus. But apps like that, if you just check the description and the ratings, then you should know not to install them, so you have to be fairly silly to actually get these things on your phone. But it's pretty unlikely you're going to get viruses unless you use cracked APKs, so then you're just sticking random things on the internet that anyone could have been touching with. That sounds weird. Anyone could have been playing with, could have done anything to them, so obviously you're opening yourself up to viruses there. But in general, Android is just as secure as every other mobile operating system. The fourth myth is that Android has to have Google services to be a good experience. If you go to China, 70% of people I think now use Android phones. They use Xiaomi phones, Huawei, and none of those have the Google services packs because Google and China just don't play well together, so you don't need that. Obviously it does make the experience quite a lot better if you're in the UK or international where you can use Google services, then it's a big plus. But if you're in somewhere like China where you don't use them anyway, it's not going to be particularly detrimental to the experience. Myth number five is that Android isn't open source. This is again untrue. Android is completely open source. You can go to source.android.com and anyone, if they know how to code, can build their own version of Android pretty much from scratch from the source code. You can stick it on toasters, fridges. I think I've even seen like e-cigarette vaporizers with Android. You can put it on whatever you want and it is completely open source. Myth number six is that Android doesn't play well with OS X. This is not true at all. If you just download the Android file transfer app onto your MacBook, then you can get your Android phone to sync across with relative ease. I mean, syncing across to anything isn't particularly good. The easiest way to do it is in the cloud, but suggesting that it doesn't work as well as a PC or Linux or OS X is just untrue. Myth number seven is that Android and Droid are synonymous. This is mainly in America where there's that big Droid brand, or at least there was, with the Moto Droid and then the Verizon Droid, things like that. And people used to get really confused. I used to have people commenting on my videos saying, will this app run on my Droid? And what they specifically mean is, will it run on this specific Android phone, which is called a Droid? Android is different from Droid. Android is just the OS. Droid was sort of like a branding, marketing thing that I believe is actually dead now, though. Go comment below if that's untrue. Number 8 is that cheap Android phones suck, and this used to have a relative truth to it. Back in the day, things like the original Galaxy Ace and some of the small HTC phones, they were pretty crappy, I'm not going to lie, but now it's got to the point where you can get a Moto X or a Moto G, and I think you can get these for around 120 quid to 90 quid, depending on which phone you get. And even the Nexus 5 is a relatively cheap sort of flagship phone. But now a lot of low-end Android phones are actually pretty good. Even the new Galaxy Ace phones are quite nice, and especially in Android L. Google's really making it so that Android L will run really well on low-end hardware. They're especially gearing it towards less developed markets like India, so you'll be able to have relatively cheap, low-end hardware running with good software, and you're going to get a really nice experience, and that is certainly going to be better than something like a really cheap Windows phone, which to be honest is pretty awful even if it's an expensive Windows phone. Number 9 is that Android is overly complicated. Now, normally people compare iOS and Android when they make this comparison, or when they say that Android's complicated. And yes, relatively speaking, it is complicated. Sort of, if Apple was Duplo, or if iPhone was Duplo, Android would probably be Lego. But it doesn't mean it's any more difficult to do all the basic things. You can get a Nexus 5 straight out of the box, and 90% of the population will easily be able to do everything they want to do. My baby sister's got a Nexus 7 and she can go on YouTube, she can take photos, she can basically do everything she wants to do on that, and we haven't had to teach her how to do it, it's just intuitive enough to work. Back in the day it was a little bit more complicated, and there's always been this sort of geek culture around Android, which I think has sort of helped perpetuate the myth that Android is a more complex OS. But really, unless you're rooting and messing around with it, then there's nothing to say Android is any more complicated than Windows Phone or iOS. And myth number 10 is that rooting your phone is illegal. I think this started because there was a lawsuit to do with jailbreaking iPhones like 3 or 4 years ago, I think. And they did rule that it wasn't illegal, but there's sort of been this subculture in rooting and jailbreaking that have kind of tried to perpetuate the idea that it's illegal. It is against warranty for most manufacturers, but even saying that, I've sent off 3 phones, 2 Samsung ones and an HTC one, to get them fixed. One of them was actually for software issues, the other 2 were hardware, but all 3 were rooted, all 3 were running custom ROMs, and each time I got them back without any delay, without any questions asked, completely fixed. So even manufacturers who say they don't like rooting, to be honest, I don't think they tend to care. I hope you enjoyed this list, guys. This is a completely new format for me just standing talking to a camera, feeling slightly silly in a jumper and getting quite warm. I'm going to try and splice in some things up here to hopefully make the video a little bit more interesting. If you like this style of video, then please like it. Please comment below if you'd like to see any other lists, or just me talking about anything else. I could do like Android 101 videos, things like that. I'm really trying to get my production levels up and get a lot more content out to you guys. So please subscribe if you haven't seen before. You can follow me on all my social media things in the links below, and I'll see you guys on Friday. Peace.